Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a significant effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight our theme will be professionals. We're going to talk about three professionals, two of whom may not be well-known household names, the third probably is, but they were all great professionals in their own fields. We don't do that many shows on doctors, lawyers, and journalists, but these three men were at the top of their fields for many years and deserve recognition. Our feature tonight is Dr. Edmund Pellegrino, who died last summer at the age of 92, and I have to be honest with you, I missed his death. It wasn't well publicized in most of the newspapers except for the Washington Post, but I studied under him for a while, and I was immensely impressed. Dr. Pellegrino was one of the foremost medical ethicists in the United States. His writings and teachings in the field were absolutely brilliant. He was a clinician also, and he strived to maintain a level of professionalism in the practice of medicine. He was one of the foremost advocates of teaching medical humanities, and unfortunately, a lot of what he advocated for has gone out of fashion today. I studied with him at Georgetown University, where he actually made his name. And in 2013, the Center for Bioethics at Georgetown University was renamed in his honor as the Edmund D. Pellegrino Center for Clinical Bioethics. He was also the president of the Catholic University of America for almost 15 years, and he was the chairman of the President's Council on Bioethics under George Bush. Again, one of the most brilliant physicians that I had the pleasure of meeting. Here's an interview with him where he discusses medicine, medical ethics, and the medical humanities.
Well, medical humanities is really a term that's misleading and almost inappropriate the way it goes. But what people really mean by it is the application of the humanistic disciplines like literature, history, philosophy, to the matter of medicine, to the way we practice medicine, to the way we behave as physicians, to our writing, to our whole attitude on the profession itself. It's not for everybody. Some people confuse it, however, with medical humanism in the sense of sympathy for the patient. And of course that's important, but that's not under the rubric of medical humanities. The first time it had any official recognition was when the National Endowment for the Humanities established a program in human values, the humanities, and ethics in medicine. And I happened to end up being the chairman of that. But the term itself, therefore, embraces those several different directions I've talked about. Because medicine is at heart a moral enterprise. The law, in some ways, understands it better than medical profession. It says it's a situation in which you have a fiduciary relationship, a trust relationship. And so when you come into my office, I say to you, what can I do for you? How can I help you? What is your understanding? What are your expectations? Don't answer. I would do that if I had the time. But ordinarily, you would say, well, gee, this guy has the technique and the knowledge that I need. And the second thing is, I hope he's going to use it in my interest, not in the interests of the insurance company, the hospital, the group he's working with, his own pocketbook. Because you as a patient are vulnerable. You're actually so vulnerable that I can take advantage of you. You don't know what's wrong. You're in distress. You're in pain. You're anxious. And here you are putting yourself in the power, literally, of another human being. What more trusting relationship could there be? I invite your trust, and you have to place it in me if you want to be treated. So that makes it a moral enterprise because ethics deals with the right and the wrong of human acts. Acts of one to another, acts toward the biosphere, acts toward every encounter they have with another person.
He was asked whether physicians are less ethical today.
No. But what has happened is their perception of what is morally justifiable has changed. Not because they're worse people. People are forever asking me, well, look at our young doctors. They're not as ethical as you were in your day. That's a lot of baloney. They were a biopsy of the American public, just as we were a biopsy. Some good, some bad, some lousy. What's different today is that the social milieu has changed. There are attitudes legitimated, acts legitimated, which would have been intolerable in our time. I could go with those in detail, but basically that's the difference. For example, just looking at the relationship as primarily a commercial relationship, or to have a doctor own a hospital. I took all my residency at Bellevue Hospital. We'd never send a patient to doctor's hospital. owned by a doctor because there's an implicit conflict of interest. Today, we have doctor entrepreneurs, we have doctors who buy MRIs after it's amortized. They continue to keep the price where it was at the amortization rate, so on. That's legitimated because business has so infiltrated the profession that it's taken for granted. That doesn't make it right, but it explains it. So an explanation, but then the question is, what do you do about it? That's a different story.
His take on liberal arts education for physicians.
Ordinarily, there was a time when the physician had a liberal arts education, propedeutic to go into medical school, and they could and knew something about the Greek classics, the Roman classics, knew something about the Renaissance, they knew something about literature of their own time. But that's hard to come by now. It's hard to come by a liberal arts education before one goes into the profession, because it does make the physician a better person. And we don't put enough emphasis on that. We talk about the humanity with the patient, but we have a cardiologist, I guess, who's interested in literature and so on. For a human being to have that interest, he cannot avoid seeing what he has been reading and thinking about in the real world about him. And then he contemplates it himself. And to write about something is to feel it. And medicine's a wonderful way, because medicine, in literature, we use our eyes. We observe, we watch things. A good writer, and I am not one, observe carefully.
He was definitely a giant in the field. Our next professional is a journalist, Garrick Utley, who died recently at the age of 74. He's a Chicago boy. His parents were Hyde Park literati. They used to hold some great salon discussions in Hyde Park, and they were journalists. His father worked for radio, television, and wrote newspaper pieces. His mother also wrote newspaper pieces. His father gave John Chancellor one of his first jobs as a copy boy. When John Chancellor went on to a successful career at NBC, he repaid the favor and gave Garrick Utley one of his first jobs at NBC. Garrick Utley went on to become a journalist in Saigon during the Vietnam War, and then he went to Washington, and for several years he hosted Meet the Press. Here is NBC discussing the death of Garrick Utley.
We are sad to report that NBC News has lost a special friend and colleague. Veteran newsman Garrick Utley has passed away after a long battle with cancer.
Joining NBC as a researcher in Europe for the Huntley-Brinkley report, Utley quickly made his way in front of the camera to become the quintessential foreign correspondent, reporting from Vietnam.
South Vietnam is developing a measure of political stability.
And throughout Europe.
American relations with Charles de Gaulle.
Back in the U.S., he covered national politics.
Thousands of delegates to the Democratic Convention poured into Miami Beach.
Even serving as a host of Meet the Press and Sunday Today, joining past hosts at a reunion for the show in 2012.
Well, having the foreign correspondent experience, was wonderful to have this platform and the wherewithal and the budgets to go out into the world.
A gifted linguist and opera buff, Utley spoke German, French, and Spanish. Before retiring from journalism, he also worked for ABC News and CNN.
Yeah, I don't know how ceremonious NBC was to him after 30 years of service, but his sign-off on Meet the Press in 1991 was memorable.
Now, a number of you have asked me, Garrick, aren't you going to meet Miss the Press after all these years? My answer is yes, but let me explain. I will, of course, miss talking face-to-face with the people who lead our government and make our laws in Congress. But what I will not miss so much is the feeling many viewers, according to my mail, and voters, according to the elections, are clearly sharing, that so much, perhaps too much of the talk in Washington is going around in circles rather than leading to solutions. If there is one phrase heard again and again at this table, it is, quote, "There's enough blame to go around." A rhetorical attempt to shift responsibility from individuals to a political system which is not working the way it should be. Well, nice try. The fact is, of course, if the system doesn't work, the individuals then can fix it, or at least try to. Take one example, money in politics. For the past 3 years, the leaders and other members of Congress have paraded through here decrying the shabby state of campaign financing. They have vowed to reform it, to reduce the influence of special interest groups, and to restore public confidence in government. And yet, it hasn't happened. There are many problems that government, in this case Congress, cannot solve overnight with a vote or a law: the economy, crime, drugs. But if it can't or won't deal with the one problem it can solve, the specter of interest groups buying influence by refinancing re-election campaigns, then what are the voters in this country to think? To say there is enough blame to go around is no longer an excuse. It is to define the problem itself. I'm Garrick Utley. Thank you for your indulgence these past 3 years.
For you trivia buffs, Carol Maureen, the longtime journalist in Chicago, was Garrick Utley's sister-in-law. We're going to close tonight with an attorney, Don Reuben, who died recently at the age of 85, and one of his proteges, Jim Munson, helped me write this obituary. There was a time when attorneys, judges, and businessmen throughout the country trembled at the mention of his name. Yet the death of attorney Don Reuben, once the most influential and most feared lawyer in Chicago, barely registered on the seismograph of the city's rich and powerful. Don Reuben was the imperious but great silent film star forgotten by the public when talkies came in. He was A.E. Houseman's runner whom renown outran, whose name died before the man. A genius, albeit an eccentric one, Reuben was generally acknowledged as one of America's most brilliant legal minds. Disdaining a desk in his office, he preferred to work standing at a podium, where he produced some of the profession's finest legal writing. A nice Jewish boy from the west side of Chicago, he was the son of a wrestler and he had combat in his blood. He married well and exploited biblical loopholes by becoming an Episcopalian and later a Catholic. The major portion of his career was spent at Kirkland & Ellis, where by age 40 he had leapfrogged over a generation of hungry competition to become general counsel of Tribune Company, owner of the Chicago Tribune. They became the beneficiaries of his absolute commitment to the First Amendment. In 1964, he appeared on the Tribune's behalf before the U.S. Supreme Court during the New York Times Company v. Sullivan case, the landmark case setting a high standard for proving actual malice when public officials accused the press of libel. But his value to the Tribune went far beyond the courtroom. In a move once considered unimaginable, Reuben persuaded legendary columnist Mike Royko to leave the Sun-Times and join the Tribune. It was the equivalent of persuading Ernie Banks to leave the Cubs and join the Sox. He also represented some of Chicago's other most powerful institutions, from George Halas and the Chicago Bears to Cardinal Cody and the Chicago Archdiocese. No less than Ralph Nader once said, "No lawyer in any other city is as powerful or as feared as Don Reuben is in Chicago." Demonstrating his legal virtuosity, Reuben represented the special prosecutor charged with contempt of court in the case involving the 1969 murders of Black Panthers Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Reuben and his high-powered Kirkland team bypassed normal procedures by starting their appeal and filing an original lawsuit in the Illinois Supreme Court. Within weeks, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor and reversed the contempt holdings, largely as a result of his masterful argument in defense of the historical Anglo-American independence of the grand jury and the constitutional protection of free speech. Unfortunately, genius of that level is too often accompanied by equal doses of hubris. Reuben once bought a large power yacht and, despite no experience or significant training, loved cruising Lake Michigan. Predictably, he disdained navigation charts and ultimately wound up running the yacht aground on the clearly marked rocky shoals of northern Michigan. That episode turned out to be a metaphor for his career at Kirkland. He did not brook fools well and cared little for the necessities of day-to-day running of a big law firm. He accepted the little people at the firm, the clerks, the secretaries, and assistants, but in truth often showed even less patience with the big people at the firm, his fellow partners. This, along with the inevitable professional jealousies engendered by his talent and success, eventually led to his downfall at Kirkland. Reuben, the man who named a son after the founder of the firm, was unceremoniously asked to leave after returning from a European vacation. Loyalty's in short supply at large law firms. Reuben was mentor and stern taskmaster to many of the top attorneys who went on to become stars in the firmaments of Chicago's prestigious law firms. One such protege recalled how Reuben drove his late model sports car to work and arrived every morning at 9 a.m. sharp. When a garbage truck changed its route and blocked his alley for 15 to 20 minutes, he summoned the protege and ordered him to solve the problem immediately. The young lawyer, realizing his career hung in the balance, summoned every intellectual muscle and filed a creative complaint for trespass and false imprisonment. The opposing counsel, terrified his opponent, called immediately, pleading for leniency. Problem solved. Impressed by the young lawyer's clever solution to the mundane problem, Reuben helped launch his career. Even so, for many years afterward, the protege admitted he lived in perpetual fear that sooner or later, Chicago's most powerful lawyer would eventually give him an assignment that no amount of effort or creativity could solve, and he would incur the wrath of Don Reuben. And no one wanted that. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. I'm going to close with my favorite lawyer song. It's by the great Blossom Dearie, and it's called My Attorney Bernie, about a lawyer who was probably much like Don Reuben.
I'm impressed with my attorney Bernie. He's got very big connections, and I follow his directions. Bernie knows his way around, and so I always do what Bernie recommends. Bernie tells me what to do. Bernie lays it on the line. Bernie says we sue, we sue. Bernie says we sign, we sign.